I've spoken on this channel before about how many of the modern criticisms towards Christianity and Christian culture are really criticisms of liberalism, or at least liberal-infused Christianity. Now, I'm not talking here about the criticisms from people like Richard Dawkins and the Four Horsemen. They're mostly liberals anyway, and although they're very popular criticisms, they're only really so strong because we're living in materialist modernity. If you have any interest in philosophy outside of that, they're relatively unserious. That's why the existentialists make much stronger arguments against Christian belief, and especially Nietzsche. Now, many of the arguments you get against Christianity from the left tend to be more materialistic in the Dawkins frame. That's because liberalism and leftism is ultimately atheistic in its tone. It's divorced from the tradition. Yet the criticisms from the right, whether people know it or not, tend to be more Nietzschean. The idea is Christianity equals a slave morality. There's an over-focus on compassion, which lacks the necessary warrior instinct to maintain a civilization. That also means it falls into decadence. And that to recover from this, Western man has to move into a sort of post-Christian morality, beyond good and evil, embrace the will to power of self-enlightenment, and become the Übermensch. Now, there are some common flaws that people point out here, the most obvious one being that Nietzsche himself was a modernist. He was an existentialist. That means he's critiquing a Christianity of modernity. Naturally, he's overlooking the fact that Christendom had such a strong warrior spirit within it that it became the preeminent culture in the world. Christendom was also capable of mobilizing huge forces to go and defend the Holy Land in the Crusades, and on top of that, an implicit part of it is the just war theory outlined by St. Thomas Aquinas. Yeah, there's an interesting argument back to this, not so much from the existentialists and the modern atheists, but more the non-Christian traditionalists. The argument is something like the true Christianity forms the mythos or the mystic heart. However, when that mythos is moved into a different region or peoples, it takes on a specific flavour which is unique to that culture. Ergo, in echoing the work of Oswald Spengler, they believe that Christianity was powerful as a warrior force because it was, quote, Germanized via the Holy Roman Empire. This process imbued Western Christianity with a, quote, Faustian spirit, that's like a warrior spirit, and moved it away from its Magian spirit, that's more a mystical spirit. So I hope this gives a basic overview into how Christianity is a mystic movement at heart. However, that movement can be institutionalized into differing religious forms specific to differing regions and peoples that emphasize certain parts of the teaching. If we were to be quite crude about this, we could note the differences between, quote, white church and, quote, black church. White church tends to be more devout, more somber. You have music with a more classical nature, hymns and poetry and quiet prayer. Black church, on the other hand, tends to be more full-on with outward expression, a higher focus on rhythm, ecstasy and gospel. Now, historically in the West, the expression of Christian truth was moderated via the tradition. That's the hierarchy that Christendom functioned under. At the top, of course, you have the tripartite God, one part mystical and unknowable, the other part Holy Spirit, the other part Jesus, the ideal man, to give us the model. One level down, you have the saints, who are also often great sinners. They provide a model for us to overcome our own darkness and failures. Then you'd move on down to the kings and the priestly class, and then down to the barons, and then into society and so on. This gave us a model across the board for the individual and the collective. It also gave us a model for the family. That is, the father is the patriarch, then comes the mother who looks over the children. As you may note, none of this is liberal. In fact, it's very patriarchal, and patriarchy is the enemy of liberal modernity, remember. This is why modern Protestant Christians who are liberals ignore St. Paul when he states things such as women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak but must be in submission, as the law says. Now, through our modernist lens, this is simply hatred and bigotry. Paul would only say such a thing because he hates women and he's a misogynist. Yet a way to explain this to the modern mind could be to arise the yin and yang symbol from Chinese philosophy. Of course, the yin is feminine and the yang is masculine. Traditional Christianity agrees that there are distinctions between men and women. That doesn't mean they're not both one in God. It doesn't mean they're not equally valued by God. It means in their manifestations they engender differing qualities. Ideally, and in the spirit of love, a man should exhibit leadership, bravery, devotion, temperance, and seek justice, while the woman should be compassionate, kind, focus on child rearing, and the promotion of virtue. This model isn't put forth because of hatred, but because of love. It's seen as the most natural and healthy model for men and women, as well as society at large. Ergo, St. Paul isn't saying women shouldn't speak in church because he hates them, but because he believes it's about correct ordering in love. Paul, in the traditional Christian spirit, is wary of feminine authority because of its over-focus on compassion. This may be sweet in its nature, but it can lead to a naivety that lets in demonic forces that corrupt the people and the integrity of the tradition. Yet with the advent of liberal modernity, with its stated aim to break down tradition, we're seeing that order start to fall apart. That's even broken into the church, and now we have women preaching and female authority, and I think you know where I'm going with this. It's led to phenomena such as this.
I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families. Some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation. But the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples.
This is a Marian Edgar Budd. She famously hijacked Trump's inauguration to give a radical leftist message. This is a perfect example of what St. Paul was warning of. It's not that this lady is completely wrong in what she's saying. Of course we should have compassion for those who are struggling with their gender identity, those that are struggling in life. But that compassion should not supersede justice. It should not supersede the well-being of the people, of the nation, of the tradition itself. Now, the reason she doesn't understand this is because she's not really a Christian. She's a liberal leftist LARPing as a Christian. That's why, in the response to her speech, the people who were behind her and gave her lots of plaudits were leftist, mainly atheist outlets. This is why The Guardian was on it like a shot, shortly followed by the BBC, and this is radical leftist Hassan Arbi stating, in quote marks, Christians when you tell them to love thy neighbour, in brackets, actual Christian stuff. Now, Hassan's tweet is fascinating because he's something of a leftist radical and an atheist, and he puts Christians in quote marks as if he's the authority to understand what Christianity is, even though he doesn't believe in any of it. He believes simply that Christianity is basically just being a liberal, being hyper-compassionate all the time and having no other qualities to balance that. He became the meme that many Christians use against snobby radical leftists. You should let in more refugees because Jesus said to be compassionate in the Bible somewhere. No, I'm not Christian, and I have nothing but contempt for your backward religious beliefs, so yeah, this argument wouldn't work on me, but maybe if I use it on you, you'll do what I want. Now, to bring things full circle, Nietzsche and his modern-day followers would criticise this woman as what Christianity eventually leads to. However, I hope we can see that what this woman is a result of a disordered Christianity which has been completely detached from its divine tradition. If we are to follow such women, or even the energy they create in the culture, the West will go to hell in a handbasket because compassion must be measured by wisdom and justice. Anyway, the reawakening of our real tradition is something I'm trying to work on my Substack, which is linked down below. I believe that begins with our own spiritual rebirth and generation, so do join if you're interested. On top of that, do let me know your thoughts about all this down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.